Well, my name is Linda Kaminski, and I am very happy to be with all of you today. I am a registered dietitian, but I'm also a scleroderma patient. So that makes you one of my favorite audiences because I am one of you and I have extensive GI involvement, as I'm assuming most of you do as well. And as a dietitian, I would have thought that I would have been able to master all of my GI problems because I work with people every day that have different types of GI problems. But I have learned over the years that scleroderma is a bigger beast than I am. And even though I have tried, it still gets me. So I have compiled a presentation to help you eat the best you can to control symptoms, as well as some of the other issues that are going on in our bodies based on what we eat. So I want you to take a moment and look at this picture. What type of emotions or feelings come to mind when you see this? Go ahead and say out loud. Excitement. Happiness, energy. I think I heard feel good. Okay. How long has it been for you since you've got out of bed feeling like that? Okay. For many of you, quite a while. Well, this time last year, I was supposed to be in Dallas speaking for the National Convention, and I was incredibly ill last year, so I was unable to make that appearance. I could not get out of bed for months. Here I am today, fortunately recovered from the ordeal that I had last year, but I do wake up feeling like this every day. Not only because I have recovered and am just so thankful to still be alive, but also because I have treated my body very, very well, better than usual over the past year. And so it is my goal today to help you start to feel like this at the beginning of every day, or as close to this as possible. And that is often directly related to what you eat. So take a look at these two pictures. Which one do you identify most with? Which one best represents your most often food choices? Do you eat salmon with vegetables? Or do you eat that big juicy burger with French fries? What your food choices are directly impact how you feel day to day. And this does not mean you have to eat perfectly. It does not mean you need to become a vegetarian and only eat the fruit of the earth. You can still eat some of the goodies and treats out there that make eating fun. However, it is of utmost importance when you have scleroderma or any other autoimmune disease for that matter, that you give your body what it needs to function at its best. And I will tell you, French fries are not it. They're not, they might be fun to eat, but they're not going to give your body what it needs. So what does a person with scleroderma need? So in terms of the dietary goals for scleroderma, there are 4 main objectives. And we are going to go through each of these 4 objectives. And one of your handouts includes all of these slides. Not the pictures I just showed, but all of the other slides. So you don't need to feel compelled to write down what you see here. It's there. But of course you can take notes as needed. I'm also going to be referencing the Eating Well with Scleroderma brochure that Dr. Khanna and I wrote about 1.5 years ago. So I'm going to be referencing this because there's a lot of good information that I don't necessarily have time to talk about in detail today, but I'm going to reference this material so that you know where to go for that information. Finally, there's a 3rd handout specifically for those of you that choose to go gluten-free. And I will be talking in detail how to go about identifying foods that may be aggravating your gastrointestinal symptoms. So that is to serve as an extra resource for you should you decide to start eliminating wheat. So we'll start with preventing malnutrition, then we'll talk about reducing inflammation, fighting fatigue, and finally improving gastrointestinal symptoms. So preventing malnutrition. Malnutrition is very common in people with scleroderma, typically for one, two, or both reasons. The first and foremost is not getting adequate nutrition. Either they have swallowing problems or difficulty with so many foods that you're not eating enough. You've cut out way too many foods because you think they're all aggravating you. Or you have malabsorption problems such that your body is not absorbing the nutrients you are eating. So you might be eating enough, but your body's not utilizing it. So the prevention of malnutrition is very, very important. Sometimes it cannot be helped and requires medical intervention, but for everyone trying to stay well and still juggle all the symptoms that you deal with on a daily basis, eating really healthy, nutritious foods is going to go a long way towards preventing malnutrition. So choosing a large variety of unprocessed foods or minimally processed foods. So in other words, if it has a really long ingredient list, you probably don't want to put that in your mouth too often because it's not very nutritious. A lot of things have been added to it that your body does not need to help you feel well. Eating every 3 or 4 hours. The more often you eat, the more nutrients you get. So if you skip meals often, you're missing out on an opportunity to eat healthy food. Modifying foods to accommodate chewing or swallowing problems. So whether that means putting things in a blender, making them easy to swallow, adding sauces and so on. Not going to extremes when eliminating food groups. And that's why I'm going to be talking about what's called an elimination diet, where you don't necessarily, if you have problems with apples, that doesn't mean you're going to have problems with all fruit. So you don't necessarily want to cut out fruit as a whole food group, because then you're missing out on valuable nutrients of foods you actually can tolerate. And that's very important. And then finally, considering multivitamin and mineral supplements. Your doctor, you should always talk to your medical professionals in this regard in terms of which supplements you should be taking, but it's very common for people with scleroderma to develop specific nutrient deficiencies. The topic of malnutrition is covered in detail in this handout, so if you want to open your the Eating Well with Scleroderma handout to the first page, on the inside, at the top, there's a box entitled Symptoms of Malnutrition. So you can look at that and see how many of those symptoms you identify with, whether it be excessive weight loss, or your hair is thinning, or you have excessively dry or flaky skin, excessive fatigue. A lot of those things can be indicators that you're not getting enough nutrients. You can also have a number of studies done in terms of blood work to determine if there are certain nutrient deficiencies, and so those are all outlined in the handout as well. And then there are suggestions about if you do have chewing or swallowing problems, how you can maximize your nutrient intake, suggestions for softer foods to eat, particularly ones that are rich in protein. So if that is of specific concern to you, you can refer to this portion of the handout. Fighting inflammation is a big part of scleroderma. Inflammation is the hallmark of autoimmune disease. You may not realize there is inflammation running rampant in your body. Physically, outwardly, you might see that your hands are swollen or red, or that certain other parts of your body are swollen and red, but inside, inflammation is generally what occurs when there are autoantibodies attacking your tissues. Now, there are no specific foods that reduce collagen production. unfortunately. And the hallmark of scleroderma is overproduction of collagen. And there are no foods that we know of at this time that we could eat to help reduce that. So what we can do to help ourselves is to eat foods that help to reduce inflammation. And again, they're going to be minimally processed natural foods. So antioxidant-rich, anti-inflammatory foods are listed on this list. So most people know what a good food is. What I am recommending to you now is to make sure they become the center of your diet. If you are eating enough fruits and vegetables, herbs and spices, so dress up your foods well with all kinds of flavors. 100% whole grains, not white refined flours that have a minimum amount of nutrition, but 100% whole grains, healthy monounsaturated fats, as well as omega-3 fats from other very nutritious foods. If you are focusing on these and making sure you're getting enough of these types of foods, then there's room for some of the less healthy foods. The problem comes when there's too much of this stuff in our diets. So it's not that you can never have foods with added sugars or artificial ingredients, but it is best to keep these to a minimum. So notice the first word on the slide under the title is limit. I'm not saying you absolutely positively have to avoid these foods in order to live well with scleroderma or to feel good. Believe me, I like my chocolate as much as anybody else does. Okay, I'm not going to give up chocolate. But there are certain foods that I do tend to favor, like ice cream, that just tears me up. So I choose not to eat ice cream very often, and I know when I do eat ice cream, I'm not going to feel well probably for the next day or two. And that is a choice I make. So if I know I have a big day the next day, I'm definitely going to be staying away from ice cream prior to that because I know it's going to bother me. So as you learn about the foods that your body tolerates and doesn't tolerate, then that makes it easier to sneak in some of those goodies and still keep it fun. Trans fats are probably the worst thing anyone can put into their bodies, whether they're healthy or they have scleroderma, they have heart disease, diabetes, whatever, just trying to prevent disease. Completely avoid hydrogenated fats. And those are what are found, it's the partially hydrogenated fats that are found in processed foods. And fortunately, all processed foods have a food label, so you can always look in the ingredient list for that nasty partially hydrogenated word. And you will also can find trans fats listed on the nutrition facts panels of foods. So it's fairly easy these days to avoid those processed foods that contain these fats. White refined grains, I can't emphasize that enough, that's basically dead food. So a piece of white bread is not giving your body any nutrition. It's just giving you some calories. That's about it. And if you are having trouble with gluten, then that's presenting a whole bunch of other problems for you as well. Processed meats, like those highly processed meats, bacon, sausage, hot dogs, junk, 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 junk. All that sodium, preservatives, and the high fat content of those, not a health food by any means. And then fried foods as well. So fried foods contain a lot of hydrogenated fats because the oils become hydrogenated in that 500-degree deep fryer. So even if they're starting out with a healthy oil to begin with, they turn into trans fats by being heated at such high of temperatures. So avoiding fried foods is a good way to go. So those French fries, again, not a health food. Fighting fatigue. Eating throughout the day, eating small frequent meals, again, not only does it provide your body with nutrients throughout the day, but it stabilizes your blood sugar. And people who don't have diabetes assume, oh, why do I have to worry about my blood sugar? Well, because our blood sugars are constantly going up and down throughout the day. If you go too long without food, your blood sugar dips. You're not going to have a lot of energy when your blood sugar dips. So if you're skipping meals or just not eating quality foods, your blood sugar is going to be going up and down and you're going to be feeling lousy. So trying to eat healthy foods throughout the day is really the way to go. Limiting junk foods. So again, it's a common theme here. Junky foods that don't provide your body with much nutrition. So they're highly processed. Limit, again, I'm not saying completely avoid. Drinking plenty of fresh filtered water. So dehydration plays a big role in fatigue. And a lot of people who are busy or don't necessarily feel thirsty don't think about the importance of drinking fluids. And I emphasize water because there's nothing more pure than water. There's no artificial, flavors added to plain old water. There's no calories, no sugar, no fat, nothing that doesn't belong in our body, provided it's clean water. And there's been a lot of controversy over the effects of plastic on scleroderma as well as other diseases. And so just by that chance that plastic can aggravate and inflame what's going on in my body, I choose to drink water out of glass or stainless steel containers only. So I like how I was given a glass of water instead of a bottled water. So having the fresh filtered water is really the way to go. And as far as how much water do you need a day, I recommend half of your body weight in ounces. So if you weigh 150 pounds, that would be 75 ounces of water a day. A lot of people don't realize that they are mildly dehydrated. They feel, oh, well, if I'm not thirsty, I must be drinking enough. You cannot count on your thirst response because usually by the time you're thirsty or really thirsty, you're really dehydrated. So it really will go a long way towards keeping your energy level up. And finally, 30 to 60 minutes of daily exercise. And I know a lot of the other speakers today have talked about the benefits of exercise for scleroderma. And I could go on and on about it. I'm an avid exerciser. It does wonders for my circulation and so on. But it really does wonders for your energy. And you might be thinking, well, I don't even have enough energy to think about exercise. But you will be amazed if you force yourself to get moving, how during the act of movement you will all of a sudden start to feel more energized. And that energy will last all day long. So exercising in the morning is a great way to get that feeling of energy that was in that first picture I showed you today, because you're getting oxygen to all your organs and to your skin and to your circulatory challenged feet and hands, and it's just a great way to get your body up and running. As far as supplements for fighting fatigue, if you have vitamin B12 deficiency, iron deficiency, or even a vitamin D deficiency, getting those corrected can make a big difference as well. So if it's been a while since you've had your blood work done to check for those particular levels of vitamins and minerals in your blood, it may be worthwhile checking. And finally, improving symptoms. And it's not just gastrointestinal symptoms that I'm speaking of here. Your joint pain, stiffness, swelling, rashes, itching, those can also be related to diet. A lot of people don't realize that, but all of your scleroderma symptoms may be improved by you identifying foods that aggravate them. So we're going to spend the remainder of the time talking about how to go about figuring that out and knowing what to do. So you have the obvious symptoms of abdominal pain, gas, bloating, diarrhea, constipation, heartburn, regurgitation. But then there's those less obvious in terms of being related to your food symptoms. So whether you get, migraine headaches or just generalized headache, malaise, fatigue, may all be caused by certain foods. So what I recommend you do is to keep a food journal for a week. You're not to take any action other than just record what you're eating, when you're eating it, how much you're eating, because portions can make a big difference. If you eat a little bit of something, it may not bother you. But if you eat larger amounts of something, it may prove to be a trigger. And then finally, relating the physical symptoms. Physical symptoms can appear anywhere from 15 minutes up to 24 hours after consuming a specific food. So if something's happening 12 hours after breakfast, you have a harder time knowing, is it breakfast? But if you keep a food diary for a week and you see these patterns start to develop in terms of the ingestion of specific foods and then certain symptoms, then you have an idea, well, gee, maybe this is the problem or maybe that's the problem. And chances are you're going to identify a few types of foods that you're going to want to look at and possibly eliminate. So the potential problem food list is very long. A lot of you probably are already familiar with some of the foods that bother you, and you may already have looked at this list and recognized, oh yeah, I can't eat this, I can't eat that, oh yeah, I already avoid this, I already avoid that. So spicy foods are likely to aggravate heartburn and regurgitation the most. You'll read a lot of literature, and it's included in the Eating Well with Scleroderma handout as well, a lot of literature about the specific foods that are known to cause heartburn or reflux, but that doesn't mean you are going to have specific challenges with those exact food. You might have a set of your own foods that bother you that aren't found on any list anywhere else. Every person with scleroderma is unique and has their own unique set of foods that they can or cannot tolerate. Now, of course, if you've made friends over the course of this conference, or you already have a good group of friends that also have scleroderma, hearing from them what bothers them may help you think, oh, well, maybe I should try avoiding that and see if that helps. Of course, it's worthwhile to talk about, but just because one person's gluten-free does not mean you have to be. And I'm emphasizing that because of the risk of malnutrition. You don't want to have to cut out more foods than absolutely necessary. Gassy foods, again, if you have a lot of abdominal bloating, pain, gas, whether it's coming up this way or going that way, gassy foods can aggravate it. So I certainly know which gassy foods I can or cannot tolerate, and I'm sure a lot of you do too, because that's probably one of the easier ones to know whether you can eat them or not. Now, fat is something that a lot of people don't think about when they think about gastrointestinal symptoms. But fat takes longer to digest than protein or carbohydrate. So fats are going to sit in our systems longer. And if we have motility problems, meaning maybe our stomach doesn't empty fast enough, and I know that's one of my big problems, so anything that's really fatty is going to sit there like a brick in my stomach. And if I have it in the evening time, then I'm probably not going to get any sleep that night because it's going to be bothering me throughout the night as I'm trying to sleep. So high-fat foods, and it's not just the junk foods I listed there. You see the hamburgers, the French fries, fried food, chocolate desserts, but it could also be something like salmon. I love salmon. Salmon is very good for you. It's good for everyone. But if my piece of salmon is too big and I'm eating dinner late, let's say I'm eating dinner at 7 or 8 o'clock at night, that salmon will tear me up all night, even though it's a healthy food. If I eat salmon earlier in the day or eat a smaller portion, I'm fine. So it's these types of things that even if it's a healthy food, it could still aggravate your symptoms. So don't ignore it. Recognize those things, and then you can change the way you eat to help your symptoms. So wheat products is a big one, especially with the gluten-free diet fads. people following gluten-free to lose weight. Do you know the #1 reason why people lose weight on gluten-free diets? It's not because gluten makes you fat. It's because they're cutting out all those gluten-containing junk foods. They're cutting out the cookies, the cakes, the pies, the pizza, the spaghetti. But then they go and gain it all back once they discover there's gluten-free pizza crust, there's gluten-free cookies, there's gluten-free pasta, there's gluten-free. So then they go on this gluten-free binge of gluten-free junk foods, and then they gain all the weight back. So gluten is not necessarily a bad thing. Wheat is a whole grain. If it's 100% whole grain, it's natural, it's healthy. But maybe our intestines and intestinal tract does not like it. We might be sensitive to it. Celiac sprue is an autoimmune disease, and autoimmune diseases tend to cluster together. Some of you may or may not have been diagnosed with celiac sprue, and I know there's a presentation tomorrow specifically on celiac sprue, and that is where you have actually tested positive for the autoantibodies for celiac sprue, and then you must eliminate all gluten-containing products. So that's not just wheat, it's also barley and rye. And in doing so, then it reduces the inflammation in your gut and vast improvement of symptoms. This handout from the gluten intolerance group will be helpful in terms of you being able to identify all the foods containing gluten above and beyond just wheat products. Now, there are varying levels of wheat intolerance. So even if you don't test positive for celiac sprue, doesn't mean you might have trouble with wheat products. It might only be certain wheat products that you have trouble with. So again, I advise you not to just blanketly cut out anything containing wheat because you could be missing out on a lot of nutrients. Dairy products. I stopped drinking milk a good 8-9 years ago. I've had scleroderma almost 11 years. So 8 or 9 years ago, could no longer tolerate milk. But I can eat yogurt and cheese, fine, no problem. And I choose, like I said earlier, I choose to eat a little bit of ice cream because I just love it, especially in the summertime. So I will eat a little bit of ice cream even though I know it's gonna wreck me. But it's only gonna bother me for 24 to 48 hours, so then life goes on. So that's something that I choose to do to make life a little more fun, right? Then there's a lesser known group of vegetables known as the nightshade vegetables. By a show of hands, how many of you have heard about these as a positive aggravator in scleroderma? Okay, so there's 4 specific vegetables in this group. And so they are botanically similar in that they contain an alkaloid known as solanine. And this solanine has been found to be pro-inflammatory. Okay? So in some folks with autoimmune illness, so this goes across the board, not just for scleroderma patients, but it can aggravate joint pain, rashes, headaches by eating these 4 vegetables. Who knew, right? Well, I will tell you that cooking, baking, these types of food does cut the solenoid level in, and you might find that you can eat small amounts. Like you can put a slice of tomato on a sandwich, but you might find that tomato sauce is a big problem for you. Or you might find eating a tomato salad where the bulk of it's tomato. So it's again a matter of the spectrum in terms of how sensitive you are. Peppers, that's not just hot peppers. It does include hot peppers like jalapenos and whatnot, but it also includes the sweet bell peppers, so the green, the yellow, the red. Those tend to aggravate heartburn too, so I know a lot of folks do choose to avoid the sweet bell peppers, especially when raw. Now cooking them does seem to make them easier to tolerate. So again, something you can choose. Finally, the most confusing group, most complicated group of foods are what are called FODMAPs. And it's an acronym for the different types of sugars that are present in food. So I would like to draw your attention to the to, let's see, what's the page number? Page 5. So it's the second to last page of the Eating Well with Scleroderma brochure. And the FODMAPs stand for, as you see at the top, fermentable oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols. And those are just all examples of different types of sugars. And to complicate things, there doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason to which foods necessarily land in which category. So when I developed this handout, I very painstakingly put foods in the foods to avoid column and the foods to choose column based on the proportion of these different FODMAPs that are present. And I can't stress enough, trying the FODMAP diet does not mean you absolutely have to avoid every food in that foods to avoid column. You will look at that and think, well, what the heck can I eat? But many of these foods you may be able to tolerate in small quantities. And in general, because it does potentially cut out a lot of foods, you will want to seek advice from a nutrition professional, preferably one who has experience with what is called the low FODMAP diet, to make sure you are getting a balanced diet. So on here you will find the wheat and the dairy foods, because the wheat contains a lot of the fructans and galactans that are classified under the oligosaccharides. And then the disaccharides, an example of that is lactose. So there are all your dairy products in there. And then the monosaccharides are those simple fructose, like honey and agave nectar, high fructose corn syrup, those types of foods. And they're additives to food. So you're not necessarily going to be eating these foods outright. So maybe if they're added, they don't bother you, or maybe they will. So it does require a lot of investigative work. And then also, finally, in the polyols, these are known as sugar alcohols. They occur naturally in various fruits, as you can see listed there, a few vegetables, but generally it's the fruits that would cause the problem the most. And then a lot of sugar-free gums have sugar alcohols added to them. So they're present in small quantities, but they could be enough to get your gastrointestinal tract fired up. So if you're a sugar-free gum chewer, make sure you're including that on your food journal to help determine if that could be an aggravate as well. So now you've done your journal. You've taken into consideration all those potentially offending foods, and now's the time has come for you to decide what to eliminate. Well, you don't want to go and eliminate everything at once, because then you'll never really know what is causing your symptoms. So what I suggest is you choose one category to focus on first. So you might choose the wheat-containing foods. You might choose the dairy foods. You might choose the nightshade vegetables or the gassy foods that were listed, and so on. So once you've start to identify a possible pattern in various symptoms, then you do what is officially referred to as an elimination diet challenge. So you will completely avoid those foods for 3 weeks. And if you start to notice a vast improvement over the course of those 3 weeks, you could probably it'd be pretty safe to say that you would be smart to avoid a lot of those foods. But let's say there are certain foods that you really don't want to have to give up unless you absolutely have to. So then you could slowly reintroduce some of those foods one at a time. Like if you're doing the wheat elimination and you don't really care about bread anyway, then just leave bread out. If you feel like your symptoms have really improved, just leave bread out. But let's say you do like to have, a cookie now and then, or you like to have some wheat pasta or something else that contains wheat. You can try that and see how your body does. And you can slowly reintroduce a food like every 2 or 3 days. and then pay attention to symptoms. So you do one food that's new from that group that you've avoided for 3 weeks, and record your symptoms. And again, remember I said they can occur anywhere from 15 minutes to 24 hours after the fact that you ate it. Avoid foods that cause distress. So then you know, if something comes flaring on back, once you start to reintroduce wheat, then you know, okay, I'm not even gonna go there, I'm gonna avoid it. But continue to eat the foods that don't cause distress. So if you chose to eliminate all those FODMAPs, but it's summer and we're in Georgia and you really want a peach, but if you notice the peach is in that polyol section, but you really love peaches, you don't want to give them up, try a peach. You may not have trouble with peaches. It might be the broader class of those particular fruits. Maybe it's cherries. I know I've done various parts of the FODMAP diet. I have no trouble with plums, nectarines, and peaches. Thank goodness, because they're my favorite. But I'm from Michigan, and I don't know how many of you know that cherries are grown in Michigan. We have wonderful cherries. I can't eat cherries. They're in that group and they tear me up. So maybe I can eat 1 or 2, but any more than that, I'm in trouble. So that's an unfortunate thing, but I've chosen to, give up cherries. But I can eat the peaches, nectarines, and plums, which is good. I'm not choosing to avoid that whole group because then I'm missing out on all the nutrients that those specific fruits contain, okay? So that is how you do an elimination diet challenge. Once you've figured out one particular group in terms of whether causing problems or not, then you can pick another, and you can continue to do this to see the impact on your symptoms. So let's read this together out loud. We did not choose Scleroderma. That's right. I choose to live well and eat well despite scleroderma. That's not to say that I have cured scleroderma or that I don't get gastrointestinal distress, because I do. But it's made a big difference. Even certain foods tend to aggravate Raynaud's. Who knew? But it's almost as if it causes, vasoconstriction in my case. So learning to find that balance, eat well, fruits, vegetables, all the good stuff. Guidelines for that are on page 4 in your brochure in detail. So fruits, vegetables, proteins, milk, dairy, whole grains, fats, and oils, in detail about what to choose, what to ideally avoid, and then suggestions. So I make suggestions about, like for example, trying to choose as many organic fruits and vegetables as possible to limit your exposure to pesticides. Because who knows if you're flaring up because of pesticide exposure. It's a chemical that's pro-inflammatory. Proteins. So like a lot of meats, if they're treated with hormones or antibiotics, you don't need that stuff in your body. Your body's stressed enough as it is. So making those more healthful choices where you're just minimizing the amount of extra stuff that comes into your body will make a big difference in terms of how you feel every day. So you can start with dinner tonight. And I know you all just had dessert before you came up here. So you may want to rethink dessert tonight if you had dessert already this afternoon. So I have written a book called You Gotta Eat. It's been on the Scleroderma website for a while. This is the newly published 2nd edition. It is basically has a conversational tone in terms of how I live well. I do talk about scleroderma, autoimmune disease, but it really is a book intended on living well, whether you're healthy and want to prevent disease, or if you're living with a chronic illness. I am a chronic disease specialist by trade. I work with a lot of people with heart disease, diabetes, and so on. That's what I did mostly, and I still do, prior to developing scleroderma, but now I work a whole lot more with people with autoimmune disease and scleroderma. So my second edition, I padded that up with a lot more information for folks like you. So now I will take questions.
What other varieties of fish besides salmon do you recommend, and which do you recommend avoiding?
Okay, great question. Fish is a little tricky because fish can be farmed or fish can be wild. Fish can come from the North Alaska, it can come from Norway, the Norwegian Sea, and so on. It can come from Thailand. So a lot of it really depends on where it's produced or where it's fished and how it is raised. My suggestion is to eat a variety of fish from a variety of different locales in order to minimize exposure to things like mercury, pesticides, and other contaminants that may or may not, be present in the tanks or in the natural seas in which the species of fish are. Now, salmon I mentioned because that's loaded with omega-3 fat, and omega-3 is very anti-inflammatory. So that's always the one that's most readily available. But if you have a choice for type of salmon, wild Alaskan salmon has the least amount of contaminants and has the most of the omega-3 benefit in it. However, it is expensive. So it's not always accessible to everybody. So some salmon's good. If it's farm salmon, vary the farm it comes from. So don't get it from the same grocery store who gets it from the same site all the time. So you want a variety. But other high omega-3 fats or fish would be like whitefish, especially from like Lake Superior. Another shout out to Michigan there. But that's a really cold water. So cold water fish tend to accumulate more fat. And the higher the fat in the fish, the more omega-3 that's potentially there. Whereas if it's a warm water fish like tilapia, for example, not a lot of fat, so you're not going to get a lot of omega-3 either. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. My
Okay.
scleroderma patient prefers rainbow trout, and she likes it best sautéed without flour in olive oil at low temperature. Is that a good choice for her or a bad choice?
Well, rainbow trout, it depends on where the source of the rainbow trout. Now, rainbow trout is a fattier fish because it's raised in cold water. If it's a Canadian rainbow trout, it's going to be healthier than like a lake, like a more southern lake trout, because they tend to be more polluted. So, but rainbow trout is a good choice, but again, vary the source of the rainbow trout. And I never suggest eating the catch of local fishermen. And in Michigan, we have a lot of small lakes, and my husband likes to fish. And I will not touch his fish because they're coming from small lakes. They're not necessarily fresh, cold water. And so you don't really know what's in them. So you want to be careful of things like that.
So I'm just wondering, when you choose to have a drink, an alcoholic drink, is there a certain kind that you should go for? Maybe light beer over dark beer, wine, light alcohol, dark liquor?
That's a great question. And I drink alcohol, and I will explain what happens with me, okay? Alcohol aggravates reflux. How many of you agree with that? Just one lousy glass of wine, and you can have reflux all night long. It's going to happen. I have found that it happens the most with wine. A cocktail like vodka, like having, a Cosmo or something, does not seem to aggravate as much. Now, that's my personal experience. With heartburn, choosing to avoid it, especially in the evening, is probably, a smart thing to do. Now, as far as health benefit, If you don't drink alcohol, don't start drinking alcohol just because you heard red wine's good for you. Because I know a lot of people ask me about red wine. If you don't drink red wine either. Red wine seems to aggravate heartburn the most, you know, in my own personal experience and in working with other folks. So it'll just kind of depend on you. Now, beer, because of the carbonation, can aggravate gas and bloating and bubbling, and it contains gluten. So again, the light versus a regular beer, it's probably more a matter of weight control at that point. The alcohol content's generally the same. Now, I have found that, like Guinness, does not bother me. But I mean, that's, you know, a dark stout beer, and I'm Irish and I drink, you know, Guinness once in a while. And that I find I tolerate. So if I'm gonna choose a beer, you know, that's generally what I'll have. But if I have more than one drink, that's when I really notice trouble. So again, that's a very personal choice of what you do, but moderation's the name of the game, and making that part of your food journal. So if you if you drink a variety of different alcoholic beverages, finding which ones you can get away with and which ones you can't.
I have one more follow-up question. Going back to the red wine, do you think that there's a connection with red foods and heartburn in general? Because I've noticed a lot of red things give me more heartburn.
Like tomatoes, red bell peppers. It's not the color as much as the categories of foods. Because tomatoes are very acidic. Red bell peppers are very gassy. They generate a lot of gas. And then red wine, the tannins in the red wine tend to be more acidic on the stomach as well, whereas white wines, the green grapes, don't have as many tannins. So it's more the tannin content. If you like tea, sometimes will bother people for the same reason. But if you drink the red rooibos tea, which is from the African tea leaves, that's very low in tannins. So some people, you know, again, will find that, you know, green tea is okay, but black tea it's not because of the tannin level. So I think from the standpoint of red wine, I think it's the tannins in the red that is the cause, whereas the tomatoes and the peppers is by the nature of those individual vegetables.
Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome.
I walked in a little bit late, so I'm not sure. You had potatoes, tomatoes, peppers, and eggplant as making things worse. And are
Potentially.
Potentially. Now, that's from for reflux, gastrointestinal. I don't have any kind of reflux problems or anything like that. Did you say that can potentially make joint and inflammation worse?
Yes. Because of the solenoid content, or the alkaloid solanine content, that it has been found in research studies that it can aggravate inflammation. That's not to say it is happening in every one of you, but it has the potential. So anytime something aggravates inflammation, every single symptom we have is aggravated by inflammation. So the joint pain we have, anytime we're having more inflammation of the joint, it hurts more. So for some folks, nightshade vegetables can trigger migraine headaches, joint pain, rashes. It could aggravate GI symptoms. It's very individualized in terms of what your symptoms are, but all of those are susceptible to, inflammation.
Do you think that I don't really, other than my hands, I don't really have joint pain?
Okay.
And the inflammation, well, my feet tend to swell too, but mainly it's my hands that are the worst.
Okay.
So do you think is that what you're referring to? That the tomatoes, potatoes can potentially make that worse? Because I don't really have joint pain all over.
It could, as can wheat. Dairy can do that too.
Okay.
So probably not so much the spicy foods or the gassy foods. That's probably more directly gastrointestinal symptoms. But any of those other ones, that I had on that list of potential trigger foods. So what you'll want to do is do the food journal as described in your handout, and see if do it for a week and include a lot of the nightshade vegetables. See if you have aggravated pain in your hands, and if you do, then choose to eliminate them. And then you'll have a good idea. Because I would hate to say, yes, automatically avoid them when they're nutritious vegetables, and tomatoes are found in everything. So that would mean that you'd feel compelled to avoid a lot of foods that contain tomatoes, and I'd rather not have you do that unless you were absolutely sure that tomatoes aggravate.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I was just wondering in terms of like good oils like olive oil and making stir fry, what's a good temperature to not lose the nutritional value of that food so that you can still maybe cook with oil but not burn out all of the nutrients from it?
Okay, that's a good question. Because the other tricky part about frying with oils is they have different flash points or smoke points at the points at which they smoke. And olive oil actually has a very low smoke point, and it can actually convert to trans fat very easily. So you don't want to use olive oil in a wok when you're doing Chinese stir fry, because that's at a very, very high temperature. A healthy oil that has a higher smoke point would be peanut oil. So if you're doing something at really high temperatures, use peanut oil. Olive oil is okay for light stir fry of vegetables. Like if you're just, sauteing vegetables or a little fish, it's not on high heat, it's like on medium, and you're cooking it gently. That's ideal for olive oil. And olive oil in salad dressings and so on is also ideal. But for the high temperature cooking, peanut oil is the choice.
What do you think of the whole, it almost seems like a fad now of having a gluten-free diet and the association with fermentation in the upper intestine, and lots of people are going gluten-free who aren't diagnosed as being gluten intolerant, but yet they say they feel so much better afterwards.
Yeah.
Or after they've converted
Absolutely.
to gluten-free.
Yep.
Gluten-free.
So they have a gluten intolerance. They don't necessarily have what's called celiac sprue, like I had explained. So that's part of the elimination factor that you can choose. Now, I went gluten-free for 6 months and had no improvement of symptoms.
Okay.
So it doesn't mean everyone is going to benefit, but boy, am I willing to try anything. And I did, but I didn't see any value in continuing to follow that restricted diet when I wasn't reaping the benefits. But if you do reap benefits, by all means, cut it out. Okay. So if you're avoiding wheat and you feel better, great. That's the idea. Just make sure you're eating other grains that don't contain wheat, like quinoa and brown rice and those types of things. Question over here.
Do you have experience with patients who are also vegetarians?
Oh, absolutely.
And
yes.
What is your experience with those kind of patients? Because I have been vegetarian for over 20 years.
Okay.
And I feel fine, besides having some symptoms, but the scleroderma,
Okay, well, it depends on the type of vegetarianism. Being a vegetarian is actually a very broad term. There are the vegans who do not consume any animal products whatsoever. So they exclude eggs and all dairy products as well as all animal flesh or your traditional meats. So they are all a plant-based diet. As you noticed on that list of potential problem foods, there are a lot of fruits and vegetables and grains that can be aggravating your symptoms. So if you are a vegan with trouble with those foods, then you're more likely to become malnourished because you're ending up avoiding a lot of what your diet should be. So depending on your symptoms, I may suggest to a vegetarian that because they have to limit so many of the vegetable-based foods or grains, that they start to incorporate some animal proteins if they're willing to do so. And under those circumstances are when you need to seek the counsel of someone like myself who is able to guide for alternatives to make sure that the diet is balanced. So a vegetarian diet will not, if that was your direct question, a vegetarian diet will not solve your GI problems. Now, it may help if depending on, if certain proteins aggravate you. Like some people find that certain types of meat they can't eat. Like I myself can't eat beef. It wrecks me. So I try to avoid beef as much as possible. But that doesn't, just because I choose to eat less animal protein does not mean that I'm following a vegetarian diet necessarily, because there are plenty of vegetables I have to avoid too. So does that answer your question, or were you looking for more? Well, I mean, it depends on their symptoms. If they have a lot of gastrointestinal involvement, it's a matter of avoiding the foods they need to avoid and including the foods that they tolerate. But I'm always willing to work with, anyone who's following vegetarian diet for religious reasons or something like that. I'm always, I'm not going to suggest that they start to eat meat, but I'm going to be focusing on, the high protein foods that are vegetable based that they are able to tolerate. Now, if they are lacto-ovo vegetarians, which are ones who consume dairy products and eat eggs, they're more likely to meet their protein requirements and their B12 requirements by eating those foods. So as long as they can tolerate enough dairy products, it's usually, can be a very healthy diet. So unfortunately, I wish I could say that, because if there was a diet one could follow to, dramatically heal scleroderma, I would be following it. Believe me. Over the course, I was a dietitian well before I developed scleroderma, and it's been my mission to heal myself. And I wish I could say I'm healed. I can live well with it, but it has been quite the battle. No question about it. There's always something new that gets me.